Mogg, and Reform Chairman Zia Yusuf, our political correspondent Lucy Dunn, and our Deputy Political Editor James Heal.
Good evening, and welcome to Coffee House Shots Live, the local elections shake-up. I'm absolutely delighted that we have Zia Yusuf, Jacob Rees-Mogg, Lucy Dunn, and James Heal with me in order to dissect what are probably the most significant local election results that we've seen for years. I'm also delighted that all of you are here as well, because after we've had our discussion on stage, I want to invite questions from the audience so that you have an opportunity to dig even deeper into our panel's reflections on what happened last week and what its consequences are for our politics. I also want to thank our partners who sponsored this evening, Charles Stanley Wealth Managers, and in particular, I'd like to thank Charles Stanley not just for their sponsorship of this event, but their continued sponsorship of so many Spectator events that bring political debate direct to you, our readers and subscribers. And we're also looking forward to welcoming lucky winners of the Spectator competition who have won the chance after this event ends to come back to the Spectator offices in 22 Old Queen Street for a drinks reception courtesy of Charles Stanley. I'm going to begin by asking James, as Deputy Political Editor, just to analyse for us the scale of what happened last Thursday. In tomorrow's edition of The Spectator, James's column looks at how Reform won and what this might mean for our country and for the other political parties. James, how momentous do you think those results were?
I think these have been a very important set of local elections because, and you talk to some of the minor parties across the spectrum, it's all been about the phrase breaking the habit. So breaking Britain's addiction, perhaps, or tradition of voting for the two-party system. And what we saw last week, I think, was important because previously, Nigel Farage's political vehicles have all focused mostly on a single cause. So first it was UKIP, then it was the Brexit Party, and now it's Reform. And so this was the sense, perhaps, that you could have Farage confined to one issue, you deal with that issue, and he was going to be done. What we saw last week was a much more sort of wholesome sort of critique of Britain, the economy, the state, how it's all going. And what we saw was finally, according to the BBC National projected vote share, Reform hitting 30% of the vote, Labour on 20%, and the Conservatives down in fourth on 15%. So what we saw was a really important breakthrough. And what we saw was Reform doing much better than sort of UKIP did at their height in, say, 2013, when they were getting 23% of the vote across the country. We saw a much more professional operation. We saw the winning places of the country polling very well that they hadn't either campaigned in, such as Gloucestershire, coming second there, or, for instance, doing very well in Merseyside as well, which is an area where sort of non-Labour parties have always struggled with. So I think the Reform did very well, but we can obviously ask the man himself here, Zia Yusuf, the party chairman. But I'd also want to mention, as my sort of role sometimes as the Liberal Democrat correspondent of The Spectator, Sir Ed Davies' party, because for the very first time, the Liberal Democrats came second in election for council elections across England. So the Reform got 677 councillors, clearly won that, but also the Lib Dems got 370 councillors, more than the Conservatives on 319. And I think this is important because I think you're suddenly seeing the Liberal Democrats, as David's been saying quite bullishly, being presented as a real alternative. And if you can give an example of how the Lib Dems and Reform did very well in this election, you'd only look, for instance, at Kent and Durham. You think Kent, you think Southern Tory, the home of Middle England, and obviously Durham, the tradition of the Labour Party, run by Labour for 100 years until 2021. In both of those now, Reform is the main party in control, and the Liberal Democrats are second. And that, I think, shows very much how the two-party system is under threat, how well Reform did, and sort of going under the radar, perhaps, is the Lib Dems. But I would only say that The Spectator does make a difference in its coverage, because we got asked on Saturday, the Today programme asked the education spokesman, Munira Wilson, what she made of her party being the party of the Bowden Belt. And she had to come up with some lines about sort of what it means to be the party of the posh. So that was something we came up with on that. But I think it was a very important set of elections. And I think it's going to be a preview of what we can expect over the next few years as we enter the age of 4 or even 5-party politics.
Thank you, James. Zia, the first thing that we have to say is congratulations. It's a remarkable achievement for reform, for a party that didn't exist in this form just 2 years ago. We'll discuss what the ramifications are more broadly for British politics, but obviously, sometimes people, in studying local elections, overlook the fact that councillors having been elected, there are services that they're going to deliver, administrations that they're going to lead. What can people in Durham, in Kent, and in all of the 10 local authority areas where reform are now in charge, what can they expect from reform councillors?
Well, firstly, Michael, thank you for the congratulations, but they are best not directed at me, but to our awesome candidates, over 1,600 of whom fought great campaigns. We won 677 seats across this great country. The congratulations go to our volunteers and our branches and our grassroots who have done so much, and obviously our MPs and Nigel who led from the front. In terms of how we look forward now, and by the way, I also want to just address James's comment about how important these local elections were. I think they were the most important set of local elections in the history of this country because they proved that the century-long stranglehold that the two, what we call the two old parties, have had on British politics has now been decisively broken. We take very seriously the business of governance. You know, we have, as we speak, our councillors are choosing their leaders. They're doing that freely and of their own volition, as you would expect. And we're going to govern in a very different way. You know, we've been very clear about what we wanted to do in local government. We never claimed to be miracle workers, but we did believe that there was waste. So, as Nigel said, if you are a DEI officer, or if you have a sneakily slightly different job title to protect you from FOI requests, you probably should potentially start looking for new work. We're going to resist, emphasis on the word resist, you know, planning applications to turn HMOs into accommodation for illegal migrants, likewise hotels, to the degree that people are trying to turn them into what are effectively hostels. You can expect our team of lawyers to work with our councils to launch legal action to resist that. We're also going to work really hard to ensure that the millions of pounds currently being spent by councils across this country, ostensibly on not fixing potholes, to actually start delivering on fixing some potholes. We're going to, in areas like Lincolnshire, we're going to work hard to ensure that massive areas of green belt are not turned into solar farms against the will of local residents. Nothing against solar, by the way, in the sense that if somebody wants to put solar panels on their private homes, cool, without being subsidized by working people, no issue at all. But it's not acceptable that Maded Miliband gets to reshape what we consider our green belt because of his net zero religion. And we're also going to look very carefully at procurement. You know, and this is not a quick win, but I think that most of the problems that ail this country, if you keep asking why, you end up in a place where it's because procurement is done catastrophically poorly. And so we're going to work very hard on that matter as well. I think I personally spent a lot of time looking at the thousands of FOI responses that we got to the thousands of requests that our team put in this year. And it's very hard getting real answers because it's like getting blood out of a stone. But it's clear that multi-million-pound contracts are being awarded by councils, now that we're in control of, without any real competition, where there's only one bidder. And there's nothing about that that's remotely acceptable. So one principle we will look to uphold in our reform-controlled councils is we will look to spend taxpayer money in the same way we would spend our own. And if you were going to get your driveway done, if you were going to get some work done in your garden, or put a loft extension in, you wouldn't just get one bid. You'd probably get more than one. And so those are these sort of common sense initiatives that we are launching. You'd have probably seen an initiative around the flag, so you'll see a multitude of our councils, probably in their first council meetings, resolve to ensure that, you know, the flags of foreign countries or around Many other woke causes are no longer permitted to be flown on council premises. I think that's a very reasonable position. So look, we're going to take a very common sense approach to local governance. We're very excited about, I've had calls now, Zoom calls with every single group of winning councillors. We're going to bring, interestingly, we're actually bringing all of our winning councillors to this very room next Sunday in our inaugural Centre of Excellence for Councillors meeting. Most of our councillors have no prior experience in elected office. We view that as a good thing, as Trump says, a good thing, not a bad thing, on the basis that they've had no hand in the damage that is caused by the previous incumbent. But we're very excited about what we're going to achieve for the British people. And I'll say this too, that we are well aware that the levers of power held by local government pale in comparison to the ones held in Westminster. Obviously, our ambition is for Nigel to get the keys to number 10 Downing Street and for us to have 350 to 400 Reform MPs in 2029. We will pull those levers of power that are available to us with all of our might in the direction of patriotism, in the direction of listening to our constituents. Frankly, in light of the news today now about, the India trade deal and what's happening now with NI, running every decision we make through the lens of what is in the best interests of our constituents, which is actually frankly, I think, quite revolutionary prospect, given the way this country and local communities have been governed over the last 2 decades.
We'll come back to some of those questions, including the India trade deal, very current in a moment. But I wanted to turn to Jacob now. And Jacob, just ask you, why do you think the local election results were as they were? And what advice would you give to colleagues in the Conservative Party about how to respond?
Well, I think the local elections were clearly on national issues rather than local issues. I don't think people were voting because they thought their local councillor in an individual ward was good or bad. I think they were voting on the national scene, and the national scene was, by the last general election, and has been confirmed since the general election, that whoever you vote for, you get much the same thing. That actually the budget we did, our last budget, could broadly have been done by Rachel Rees, and that the green agenda has unchanged. I mean, Miliband's going a bit further than we went, but not much. The renters reform stuff that you were doing, which I loathed, I'm sorry to tell you, is being pushed ahead with socialist enthusiasm by the new government. And people looked at us and looked at Labour and thought, well, it doesn't make a lot of difference. And I think that's been a real problem. I think it's very hard for a new leader to suddenly change that, because we've had this feeling of, and Nigel has put this very well, of a uni-party. And if you look at what's happening, not just in this country, but in America, people are absolutely fed up with the business as usual. They're fed up with the feeling that however you vote, it doesn't change things. And they've now voted in a way that they think will change things. Now, it won't actually, because as Zia was very sensibly pointing out, most of the levers of power in Westminster are not in local government. So yes, they can change the flags, but an awful lot of the duties of local councils are statutory duties that they have to carry out. Regrettably, they won't be able to get rid of as much DEI as I would like them to, because they have, as a public body, the public sector equalities duty. That's laid down in law. They'll be endlessly taken to court if they don't follow it. So there's not going to be a big change on how we're governed immediately because of this, but it is a reflection of the deep fed-upness of the electorate, and to my mind, understandable fed-upness. What advice would I give? The advice I would give to the Conservative Party is to be conservative and get back to what we're meant to do, which is to be on the side of the people who vote for us. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you take net zero has given us the most expensive energy in Europe, particularly electricity prices. Our industrial electricity is 4 times the cost of energy in the United States. This is making people cold and poor. Why on earth were we going along with that? It's crazy policy, and it makes no difference to the world anyway, because we're only 0.9% of emissions. We went along with the fashionable internationalist view of the world and accepted that for too long at the cost of our constituents. And that was fine in its way when everyone was prosperous. Once the economic climate became more difficult, that changed. we also have gone along with a lot of woke sensibilities. But just think how cautious we were when we were in government over Black Lives Matter, which was all absolute nonsense. It was nothing to do with the UK. It was an American issue to do with American policing, and we were tiptoeing around it as if it had something to do with the United Kingdom. It didn't. And Colston Gay's statue was, not Colston Gay, who's a friend of mine, wrong, the Colston statue was pulled down, the statue in Bristol. Colston statue was pulled down, and the law wasn't enforced properly to stop it. It was absolutely feeble, and we were in charge, and people thought this just isn't good enough. So we need to be conservative, we need to stand up for what we believe in, we need to stand up for the country, for the success of Britain, for our amazing historical achievements, and we need to stand up making people better off. And then I think people may begin to listen to us again.
Many of the points that you make, I sensed Zia would have agreed with, and might even say had been articulated more strongly or more clearly in the last couple of years by Nigel Farage. What would you say to someone who, say, Jacob, I absolutely trust you, and I'd love to have you in Parliament again, but many of your colleagues, you just alluded to some of the lefty policies followed by Michael Gove, many of your colleagues...
Sorry about that.
No. Many of, quite right, many of your colleagues, deserve actually slightly longer to, reflect and think on their errors. Given everything you've said, we're going to give reform a go, because as you yourself said, reform can change some things in local government, but we can only get real change if there's change at Westminster, and that's the biggest change that we can see.
Yes, I think, and Zia will have to disagree with me, but we need to get a collaboration between the Conservatives and Reform, and we as Conservatives have to recognise that these elections were a huge victory for conservatism, but not for the Conservative Party. They were a victory for views that Conservatives hold. And I don't buy into James's analysis so much on the Lib Dems, because what did well for the Lib Dems is where they came through, where the Tories and Reform split the vote. That was the main thing. The Lib Dem vote, and it depends who you believe, and different people give different percentages for these elections, but the BBC, which we will normally not quote as a source of authority, but on this occasion I will, the BBC says that what they got in 2021 and 2025 was the same national percentage share. It wasn't a big rise in Lib Demery, it was a big fall in conservatism. And that's really important because that shows...
If you're watching this, then it means you'll no longer be able to listen to myself, James Heal, Michael Gove, Zia Yusuf and Jacob Rees Mogg have this discussion. It's a subscriber-only event, and so you'll have to go to spectator.co.uk/live and sign in with your Spectator email address. If you're not a subscriber, then what are you waiting for? For just £3, you will be able to get full access to this and other live stream events, as well as the Coffee House website, the app, our daily newsletters, our daily podcasts and video content. So for just £3, subscribe now. Great to see you're still hanging around, but what are you waiting for? If you go to spectator.co.uk/live for just 3 months for £3, you'll get access to this and other live streamed events and so much more. Subscribe now. Great to see you're still hanging around, but what are you waiting for? If you go to spectator.co.uk/live for just 3 months for £3, you'll get access to this and other live streamed events and so much more. Subscribe now. Great to see you're still hanging around, but what are you waiting for? If you go to spectator.co.uk/live for just 3 months for £3, you'll get access to this and other live streamed events and so much more. Subscribe now. Great to see you're still hanging around, but what are you waiting for? If you go to spectator.co.uk/live for just 3 months for £3, you'll get access to this and other live streamed events and so much more. Subscribe now. Great to see you're still hanging around, but what are you waiting for? If you go to spectator.co.uk/live for just 3 months for £3, you'll get access to this and other live streamed events and so much more. Subscribe now. Great to see you're still hanging around, but what are you waiting for? If you go to spectator.co.uk/live for just 3 months for £3, you'll get access to this and other live streamed events and so much more. Subscribe now. Great to see you're still hanging around, but what are you waiting for? If you go to spectator.co.uk/live for just 3 months for £3, you'll get access to this and other live streamed events and so much more. Subscribe now. Great to see you're still hanging around, but what are you waiting for? If you go to spectator.co.uk/live for just 3 months for £3, you'll get access to this and other live streamed events and so much more. Subscribe now. Great to see you're still hanging around, but what are you waiting for? If you go to spectator.co.uk/live for just 3 months for £3, you'll get access to this and other live streamed events and so much more. Subscribe now. Great to see you're still hanging around, but what are you waiting for? If you go to spectator.co.uk/live for just 3 months for £3, you'll get access to this and other live streamed events and so much more. Subscribe now. Great to see you're still hanging around, but what are you waiting for? If you go to spectator.co.uk/live for just 3 months for £3, you'll get access to this and other live streamed events and so much more. Subscribe now. Great to see you're still hanging around, but what are you waiting for? If you go to spectator.co.uk/live for just 3 months for £3, you'll get access to this and other live streamed events and so much more. Subscribe now. Great to see you're still hanging around, but what are you waiting for? If you go to spectator.co.uk/live for just 3 months for £3, you'll get access to this and other live streamed events and so much more. Subscribe now.